Hello and welcome. My name is Ellen Kittredge, and I'm super excited to be with you here today, and presenting about the gut microbiome, the 5 pillars or the 5 keys to good health in the gut microbiome. So we'll begin with an overview of some of what the gut microbiome is, some sort of just fun factoids and things to get your mind around. And just really get a sense of why the gut microbiome is so important for overall health and how much of our health we can actually, modulate by working with the gut microbiome. And then I'll move into the 5 pillars or the 5 keys for the gut microbiome, which is going to be these 5, specific different areas that we want to be focusing on to really support the gut microbiome. So that's where there's going to be a lot of very practical things you can do right off the bat. One of the coolest things about the gut microbiome is it takes within 24 hours, if you make some dietary changes within 24 hours, about 15 to 20% of your microbiome can shift. So we have an incredible capacity to, effectively change our health very quickly by just what we're doing with our diet and other changes. So I think that's one of the most exciting things for me about the gut microbiome is that there's so much that we can do to assist our health. So it's a really beautiful thing to be able to come to that awareness. So today's talk is inspired by teachings that I received from one of probably the top researchers in the gut microbiome field and on the planet. And there's a few folks who I have turned to in the last couple of years as I've been learning more about this, who have about 20 years probably under their belt in gut microbiome research. The field has only been around for relatively very short period of time. So this is a incredibly, emerging field. There is like so much research coming out all the time, literally studies happening right now. There's an incredible new field of precision probiotics, which is where they're figuring out, exactly what certain very specific strains of good bugs can do for us and which ones are connected to specific chronic health conditions and all the rest of that. So there's a huge amount of research that's kind of like, continually tumbling out around this topic area, which is super exciting because it's very cutting edge. But I think what I want to present today is sort of just a lot of them really, really foundational stuff. We probably won't get too fancy with any of the specific precision probiotics, but just more about what we can all do on a daily basis to really support our gut microbiome. So the first thing we want to think about is that think of this word as called the holobiome, which is this sort of understanding that the entirety of our organism, of our body, is actually like a superorganism. We're kind of like a walking, talking rainforest. So we actually have all of these microbes that are part of who we are and that live on our skin, in our mouth, in our sinuses and our gut, everywhere in our body. And this is truly who we are. We're not this individual, physical body. We actually are like this sort of walking, talking rainforest of this continual interaction of all these different microbes and species. So to help understand this, humans have 20,000 different functional genes. An earthworm has 30,000 different functional genes. The microbiome has 3 million functional genes. So the microbiome has 150 times greater genetic diversity than what's in our actual genes. So much of what is actually happening for us when it comes to maintaining our health and what actually helps us to live and to exist actually comes from these functional genes in our microbiome. So that's what I mean when I say we're sort of like a superorganism. All species and all ecologies are critical for the functioning of the whole. So we just need to work together, for the functioning of the whole. And if the mouth is dysfunctional, so say we have issues in the oral microbiome, this can lead to issues in the stomach. And also oral microbiome issues can lead to an increase of irritable bowel disease in our large bowel. So whatever's going on in one place in the microbiome, wherever it is in the body, can lead to dysfunctions in other places in the microbiome. So it's all connected, which I think anyone who's interested in, functional medicine or kind of looking at things in a slightly more alternative way from the allopathic kind of already understands this sort of systems thinking that systems matter and all systems are connected, and we're not really doing siloed thinking. So we're not saying, oh, well, this is your, pancreas, and this is what your pancreas does, and we just treat the pancreas, or this is your, your ear, and this is what your ear does, and we just treat the ear. We look at everything as a system-wide thing. So our microbiome weighs, and this is our full microbiome, not just our gut microbiome, but it weighs about 3 pounds, which is about the same weight as our brain. So that's how many little bacteria we have moving around in our body. And it's not just bacteria, it's all sorts of different, yeast and fungus and things like that. Most of them beneficial, some of them problematic. There are 10 main essential functions of the gut microbiome. And as I mention these, I just want to recommend that you think about your own self and your own health and where areas of your own imbalance, and just, sort of key into that. So the gut microbiome is essential for hormonal regulation. So basically it influences estrogen, cortisol, and all sorts of other hormones, but mainly we want to think about, there's a really important relationship with estrogen, breaking down of toxic estrogen and being able to actually, send it out of the body is a really, really important function that the gut microbiome can either assist with or can actually cause problems in, depending on what's going on with your gut microbiome. It's super important for the regulation of cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and a lot of other hormones as well. So basically, hormones can affect energy, mood, metabolism, and the gut microbiome plays a role in that. The gut microbiome plays a really important role in brain health. So our gut-brain axis basically allows our gut bacteria to produce neurotransmitters, serotonin, things like that basically directly impact our mood and our mental clarity. There's a strong relationship between dysfunctions in the gut microbiome and development of things like Alzheimer's. So, but also not just that, but sleep, mood, anxiety, those kinds of things. Immune function, about 70% of our immune system resides in our gut. So if we have a dysbiotic gut, if our gut is really out of balance, then that cornerstone of resilience against illness is going to, is not going to be there. And that's a really important place to focus. The fourth one is autoimmune conditions. So I would like to remind people, if you have an autoimmune condition, first of all, it's been in development for probably 20 years at a minimum. So it takes time for these to develop. To be able to have an autoimmune condition present in the body, you need to have a genetic component, you need to have a trigger, and you need to have dysfunction in the gut microbiome. So those three things are at play if you have an autoimmune condition. So that means if you can try to figure out what your genetics are and try to support your genetics better with different dietary changes or specific supplementation, or if you can figure out what that trigger is and see if you can, detoxify from what that trigger is or reverse it or whatever, that's great, but you can do a huge amount. And that third area in the gut microbiome is another area that you can address to support, reversal of autoimmune conditions or finding stability within your ability to live with that autoimmune condition. The gut is important for nutrient absorption. So their gut ensures proper absorption of essential nutrients, which basically fuel every cell in our body. They'll talk a lot more about this because this is an important piece. But certain methylated vitamins, B vitamins, and also K2 are actually made in the gut. And this is one of the interesting things to think about. So there's a really common genetic, mutation or polymorphism called MTHFR. I think some of you may have heard of that or be aware of that, but it has to do with methylation pathways in the body. And if the gut is really happy and is making adequate methylated B vitamins, then that might be why you can live with the MTHFR gene mutation and maybe not notice it if your gut's really happy. And then if your gut starts to get dysbiotic and problematic, then maybe you start having more problems with this particular gene mutation. Metabolic health is the sixth section area. So a diverse microbiome really supports balanced blood sugar and healthy weight management. This is also an area that I want to do a lot more conversation around. And I'm going to be doing in my upcoming cleanse, I'll be having a guest presenter come and talk about this very specifically, about the GLP-1 hormone, which is important for appetite regulation, satiety, and insulin, regulation. So that's a super, super important. This is one of the areas where these precision prebiotics are really the fascinating research is coming out. The seventh area is detoxification. So our guts help to remove toxins and reduce the burden on the liver and the other detox systems. So if the gut is working for you, then you can actually really impact your detoxification, and those pathways can get much stronger and be working much better. If your gut is dysbiotic, then it can start to cause more problems and actually impact your liver and make your liver work harder. So it goes in both directions. Chronic disease prevention is another area. So poor gut health is a factor in conditions like heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. And there is some research that's pointing to if you do have cancer and you're going through cancer treatment, specifically, I think immunotherapy, and your gut is healthy, then your outcomes are likely to be much better. And if your gut is not healthy and you're getting immunotherapy, it's likely to be not as good an outcome. So the gut does play a really important role in this as well. And then skin health. So this is a hugely important part of the gut microbiome. But the healthy gut can basically improve conditions like eczema, acne, and rosacea. So there's a very strong correlation there. And finally, the inflammation control. So basically, our gut can play a really important role in regulating systemic inflammation. And systemic inflammation is one of the main, underpins of most chronic health issues. So if we can reduce our inflammation through supporting the gut, then we can, really start to turn around some of the more chronic health conditions. So one of the reasons that I really, really love to learn from Krishnan specifically, who is the founder of Microbiome Labs, which is the company that I work with to do the gut biome testing, is because he's so passionate about this pathway of diversifying our gut microbiome and bringing that diversity back. And he really has said that like one of the greatest tragedies that's happening right now is the loss of our gut microbiome. So basically, the killing off of species that don't come back. So it's in a healthy, or I should say, in sort of indigenous populations that have, sort of foraging hunter-gatherer populations. For instance, there's the Hadza tribe in Papua New Guinea. These kinds of tribal peoples, they have found upwards of 2,000 unique species in the microbiome. So these are these traditional peoples that have maintained a very diverse microbiome. The average North American has about 200 unique species. So this is a massive, massive loss of diversity. And this is one of the major problems that we have, I believe, with the chronic health epidemic that is happening, in our culture at this time. So this is one of the reasons I just feel so passionate about doing this education, because I think it's so important to increase this. So the average person in general has about somewhere between 300 to 700 microbes overall in the body. And again, this is where 2,000 would be the amount that we would have, perhaps historically. But again, the average North American is more like 200. So we really have a lot to do, I think, especially in the US, where there's been a lot of modern lifestyle factors, things like overuse of antibiotics, lack of diversity in the food, lack of fiber, and also over-sterilization and excess hygiene that are, really problematic. So see that these are some of the things that are happening in the West that have just become more, more standard. There's also impacts at the point of birth. So C-sections, about 33% of babies are born via C-section. And when the babies are born via C-section, then unfortunately they miss an important inoculation of the vaginal microbiome from their mom. So now there's some hospitals that actually will, take some of the vaginal microbiome from the mom and actually put it onto the cheeks and put it into the mouth of the baby and actually try to do the inoculation post C-section, because they know that this is so important to do this now. And I think there's one of the other main factors in the, decrease, the massive decrease in diversity is processed foods. So there's a lot of compounds in processed foods that can really hurt the microbiome. So these are things like flavoring agents, coloring agents, pesticides, herbicides, antimicrobials. So all of those things actually over time just really can start to kill off the gut microbiome. So as we lose diversity, we lose functionality. So that's what we really want to, the kind of key point to drive home. So the consequences, less diverse microbiome, we start to lose functionality. And that means then these, autoimmune conditions, chronic infections, metabolic disorders, neurodegeneration, hormone imbalance, mental health issues, all of this then starts to crop up. When I was doing this training with Kiran, he gave a really wonderful example of, something that I think most of us probably have been aware of, which is that 90% of this body's serotonin is produced in the gut. And a lot of other neurotransmitters are as well. So we think of serotonin, we think happiness. That's kind of like keeps us happy, right? But serotonin is also important for a wide range of other things that happen in the gut. And, so and if there are only certain microbes that actually stimulate the production of serotonin in the gut. So if we've lost these microbes, then these, specific good bacteria, then our capacity to produce serotonin is not there. Like if we lose all of those microbes, we literally cannot produce serotonin in the gut. That's 90% of serotonin loss, okay? So this is why the loss in diversity matters, because these certain specific microbes, they have very specific functions. So maybe in a healthy gut, you've got many, many different microbes that can help to stimulate the production of serotonin. But if you've had a lot of diversity loss, then maybe you have like one microbe left that can produce serotonin. And that microbe then has a really huge and important task. So what we really want to do is we want to really focus on, first of all, trying to not kill off the microbes that we do have. And second of all, increase the diversity, which is a lot of what I really want to focus on today. But just a couple things just to understand sort of symptoms that can be linked to not having adequate serotonin production. And in addition to mood disorders, which is probably the first thing we think of, chronic constipation can be linked to that. Weight gain, feeling queasy after eating, gut inflammation issues, so things like irritable bowel disease or Crohn's disease. If we have enough serotonin, it minimizes inflammation and minimizes the likelihood of developing those sorts of things. It's also important for fluid retention, which is why then we can have issues with, more constipation, or even things like hemorrhoids or lesions or micro tears. There's also a relationship between serotonin and bone health. So osteoporosis and the absorption of bone. So serotonin plays a role in the density regulation of the bone health, because it activates these osteoblastic cells, and those are the ones that build the bone. So I have a lot of clients that come to me and they have, osteopenia or osteoporosis, and there is a role within the gut microbiome for bone health. So this is just an example of, one of the many different things, the functionalities. So again, we lose diversity, we start to lose functionality. And so the good news, though, is like I said at the beginning, is we can shift within 24 hours, we can start to shift our gut microbiome. And that's really, really important thing to be aware of. So there are so many areas that I could focus on. I just want to kind of touch kind of briefly on a couple different things that I think are really key, important points that I want to kind of bring home, and then we'll move into the conversation about the 5 pillars. So there is something called a short chain fatty acid, or SCFA, and short chain fatty acids are I'd like to think of it as the gifts that the gut microbiome give us. So the gut microbiome produces these short chain fatty acids, and they play incredibly important roles in maintaining our overall integrity of the gut. So if we eat what our gut microbes like, then they produce these things for us, and they produce them in really good amounts. So I'm just going to do a very quick screen share, because I think sometimes it's nice to have a little visual, and I will show you what these short chain fatty acids are, just so you can see what this looks like. So this is we're looking at a Microbiome Labs test result. So this is the 4 short chain fatty acids that we look at are butyrate, propionate, acetate, and lactate. And the levels of these in your gut microbiome, depending on what the levels are, can indicate what's going on for you. But the most important one to focus on is this butyrate. And as it says here, it's arguably the most important short chain fatty acid. Basically, it is one that is a very, very key one. So a lot of times, if there's low butyrate function or production, or if I'm seeing that there's not enough, species that are making butyrate, then that's something that I'm really specifically focusing on with, dietary recommendations. So that's just a brief kind of look at that. But let's now talk about the chronic diseases that are linked to not enough butyrate production. Obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, dementia, irritable bowel disease, Crohn's disease, chronic diarrhea, and also chronic constipation. So all of these things can be linked to not enough butyrate production. So there's certain gut microbes that produce butyrate if we feed them the right foods. And we'll talk more about that before the end of the call. But that's just one of these really, really key things that the gut microbiome does for us. So basically we can understand that a microbiome is like a main driver of either our health or our disease. If it's healthy, then we have resiliency. And this is where I'm ideally trying to get everybody to when I'm doing their protocols with them, is to a place of resiliency. So what this means is you get to the place where you can have sort of like an 80-20 diet, which is sort of 80% of the time you're doing all sorts of really good stuff for your gut and eating really well and healthy. And then 20% of the time you have a little gluten, you have some drinks, you do whatever, you kind of go off a little bit from your healthy diet. That's where we want to get to. We want to get to that point of resiliency. And so when I see that I have clients who are needing to be very specific in their food focus and avoiding a lot of foods, and then we can start to put those foods back in and they're not reacting to them anymore, then we know that the gut microbiome overall has become more resilient. And that's really what we're trying to get to. So some of the main, some of the main things that we can do to help to support the gut microbiome, I'm going to talk about in the 5 pillars. But I wanted to just drop in a little bit more deeply with some of the immune system conversation and a little bit more about sort of autoimmune conditions or sort of immune regulation. So there was a really interesting study where they had sterile mice. So they raised mice with no microbiome. Basically, we all have immune system components in our bone marrow and our thymus. So we have an immune system that is innate to the body, but then we have the gut microbiome, which is a really important part of training the immune system. So there's a constant conversation that's going on between the gut microbiome and our immune system, and there's a training that happens. So when we come into interaction with pathogens, then the gut microbiome is helping to train our innate immune system of how to react. So in this particular study, they raised these mice with no microbiome, and they injected them with a pathogen, and the immune system did not react. So their own immune system didn't understand that this was a pathogen, and then that was, led to death of the mice, basically. So not a very kind study to do for the poor mice, but it helps us to understand the importance of this conversation that is happening between the microbiome and the immune system. So our immune system literally is not going to function without the conversation that's happening with the microbiome. And over or under reactions of the immune system are due to issues with the microbiome. And this is a really important conversation, because there are so many of the chronic conditions that are linked to this either underreaction or overreaction of the immune system. So a lot of what I see with a lot of folks is just a lot of systemic inflammation and hypersensitivity and hyperreactivity in the immune system, leading to having to have, a much more limited diet or being oversensitive to a lot of different things. This is something that I experienced myself, and that I've had to kind of work through and figure out and heal from as well. But basically, you need a good, healthy, diverse microbiome to tolerate the world around you. So if you're not tolerating the world, if you're reacting to the world, it could be because your microbiome is not diverse enough. And just to drop in, just to geek out very slightly on this, there's secretory fluids, fluids that we release from the body that are very, very important, and that they basically, what they do is they bind to things and they neutralize pathogens as they enter the body. And this can happen without eliciting a response if we have the right type of this neutralizing antibody, which is called secretory IgA. So if we have enough of this, then we come into contact with the pathogen or whatever, and it's taken care of, and we're not aware of it. So we don't have a big rash that forms. We don't start, having, sinus issues. We don't have, histamine response, all that kind of stuff. However, if we don't have enough IgA, then the immune system has a backup, which is called IgE. The IgE is very reactive, so this causes inflammation through the production of things like histamine, leukotrienes, etc. Our gut microbiome is important for producing enough IgA. So if our gut microbiome is not producing IgA, our immune system says, okay, well, we got this IgE, which we can also use, but then that means we start hyperreacting to things. So feed the gut microbiome, support the gut microbiome, produce more IgA, and then we become much more tolerant of the world around us. So again, this is just another thing. I hope it's helpful to have, some of these little specifics to kind of understand how the immune system works and kind of what that conversation is that is going on. So a few sort of just to help understand again, just some of the things that we can look at that are sort of signs and symptoms of imbalance in the gut microbiome, and then signs and symptoms of balance. So signs and symptoms of imbalance might be frequent digestive symptoms, food intolerances or reactions, chronic skin conditions, acne, eczema, rashes, that sort of thing, chronic fatigue and low energy, frequent infections, and also more severe infections. So having, infections that you get, sick more frequently, and then also when you do get sick, it's actually more severe. Persistent joint pain, chronic inflammation, autoimmune disease. Again, any autoimmune disease has a gut microbiome component. So if you've got an autoimmune disease, just know that this is a place that you can work to support it. Anxiety, depression, brain fog, all those sorts of brain or mental health related conditions, and then weight fluctuations and hormone imbalance. So all of these are signs and symptoms of imbalance. So then on the flip side, what does it look like if we have balance in the gut microbiome? We have strong digestive health. We have no or minimal food sensitivity. We have healthy, clear, and vibrant skin. We have balanced energy levels throughout the day, strong immune resilience, stable mental health, relatively free of pain and inflammation. We might still have, temporary times where we have something that happens and we get some pain or inflammation, but it clears pretty quickly. And then balanced weight and hormone balance. So these are all things that are signs and symptoms of balance. And I would say in general, if we think about chronic illness, we really have to modulate the entire system to push it into a good place. So that's, if we've got a chronic health issue, then it is a longer term process of, shifting this into a good place, but it can all happen. So it's entirely possible. Okay, I think I'm going to bring my focus now and just 1 minute here to the to the 5 pillars. I just wanted to touch very briefly before I move to that on the microbiome and weight, because so many people come to me because they're wanting to lose weight or, find a way to healthily balance their weight. And so this is where this conversation about the activation of GLP-1 or GLP-1 agonists come in. So I think probably a lot of you have heard about these new injectable drugs that are really taking the market by storm, and that people are using to sort of rapidly lose weight. Basically, they help with appetite suppression. Unfortunately, they also have a lot of really problematic side effects. And so one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that there are many different things that can stimulate the natural production of this GLP-1, which is a hormone that controls appetite and satiety and also regulates our blood sugar levels. And so there was a call I did this summer called Eating for a Healthy Midsection. So trying, really helping to understand, okay, if we've got weight gain around the middle, or if we have these other metabolic syndrome conditions, things like increase in our triglycerides, increase in our our cholesterol, increase in our, blood pressure, and increase our higher blood sugar, blood glucose levels, then we're starting to end up with what's called metabolic syndrome, which can down the road lead to more issues, including like prediabetes and diabetes. So this is a really, really important area to focus on because diabetes is becoming, such an incredibly chronic and problematic thing. So blood sugar regulation through activation of this GLP-1 and also something called PYY is a really, really important place to focus, I think, overall in the gut microbiome. And so butyrate, our friend butyrate that I mentioned before, is really important in this process. It actually helps to stimulate GLP-1 production. And there's a lot of other foods that specifically help to do this. Are dark colored berries, so blueberries, cherries, blackberries, all of these are really, really important. Also, something called EGCG and catechin from green tea. So drinking green tea every day, if you can do that, if you like that, or taking even an EGCG supplement can be really, really helpful for regulating this GLP-1 and keeping our blood sugar stable. Dysregulation of the blood sugar is a foundational step in chronic disease propagation. So when I have clients come to me and they say, hey, I'm getting kind of on the edge of the pre-diabetic, and I also seem to have this increasing cholesterol, and my blood pressure is going up, and it's like it all happens at the same time. But oftentimes the dysregulation of the blood sugar is something that's been going on for a very long time before it actually starts showing up in the lab work. But then once that happens, then it's like this domino effect of all of these other things starting to go off. So if we can support the gut in producing more of this GLP-1 and we can start to regulate the blood sugar from that angle, then that can just be massively helpful in, reversing a lot of these things. So that's one area that I think is especially important and exciting. So I'm just going to mention very briefly the skin microbiome and then the oral microbiome, and then we'll move into that section on the 5 pillars that I keep promising I'll talk about. I just want to mention these other microbiomes because they're so fascinating and important. And again, these are areas that I'm going to drop into much more deeply in future calls, more specifically. So the skin microbiome is a super complex ecosystem. It can be up to 1.5 trillion bacteria overall. Our skin is our largest organ in the body. So if you think about it, we have, and it's an incredibly important protective barrier and kind of the first layer of the immune function as well. So there's can be up to 1,000 different species of this in the skin microbiome. And one of the things that we understand now is that aging skin is the best predictor of chronic disease and mortality. So our skin starts to age, we start to notice this hyperpigmentation, wrinkles, fine lines, sagging, all of that kind of stuff. And then we get cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, autoimmune disorders, etc. So leaky skin is something that is problematic in addition to leaky gut. Because basically that means that it allows, toxins and pollutants and pathogens to potentially penetrate the skin. So leaky skin is actually an independent risk factor for chronic illness. So if you do have, chronic skin issues, just be aware that this is another important part of the gut microbiome, of the overall microbiome to support. And the other interesting thing about this is estrogen actually protects the skin, which is why when women go through perimenopause and then menopause is oftentimes when we start to see all the skin changes, because there's such a massive drop in estrogen. So that's why that can happen. And then the oral microbiome, I think the oral microbiome is something that I have learned more about looking at gut microbiome tests than I realized. And this is because the vast number of chronic conditions actually have the oral microbiome as a root driver. So I'm starting to really understand now, if I look at someone's gut microbiome test, what the indicators are that they actually have an issue with their oral microbiome that's actually really impacting the gut microbiome. So the oral microbiome, we can have up to 700 species in the oral microbiome. It's about a third of the total bacteria in the overall microbiome of the entire body. And the oral microbiome, prevents gum disease, cavities, inflammation, helps regulate pH, helps to prevent periodontal disease. The oral microbiome also produces nitric oxide, and this is important for blood pressure and cardiovascular health. So, and the microbiome in the mouth is the predominant supply of nitrous oxide in the mouth. So if we have a healthy oral microbiome, then this is why I think people have probably heard about the relationship between like periodontal disease and cardiovascular health. So this is what's going on here. The other issue is that gum tissue gives direct access to the blood. So if we have a lot of bad bacteria in our oral microbiome, then we have this systemic inflammation that can come straight from the mouth. So that's where some of the inflammation in the body is coming from. It's not coming from the gut, it's coming from a sort of a leaky oral microbiome. And the other piece here is that we swallow approximately 1 trillion microbes per day. So we have a lot of bacteria in our mouth. We want them there. We want to make sure they're the right kind, and we swallow them. And ideally, we have enough hydrochloric acid in our stomach to kill those bacteria so they don't go further down and end up in the small intestine or in the large intestine. And so oftentimes what's happening with conditions like SIBO, which is a lot of sort of chronic gas and bloating, and it's like one of the more difficult chronic, conditions that people end up with, oftentimes that starts in the mouth. And it has to do with not enough hydrochloric acid or not enough bile salt production. So liver, gallbladder kind of functionality breaking down, not killing off these oral microbes as they should be killed off. They end up further down in the gut and they start causing all sorts of problems there. So when we think about our gut microbiome, we really want to focus a lot on the oral microbiome. And so that's one of the things that I will talk about as we now move into the 5 pillars of this conversation. So one of the things that I wanted to share here in the in the 5 pillars conversation is just, I'm going to give you a good amount of information for each pillar, things that you can do. What I want to encourage you to do, so you don't feel overwhelmed, is just to choose 1 or 2 things from each pillar to do. So I may make a list. I'll share some things. You might say, I'm actually doing that already. I'm doing that pretty well. But if there's like 1 or 2 things that you're not doing in each of these pillars, and just write them down and just start doing those. And basically, what we want to understand is that we need to do at least 1 thing, or ideally more than 1 thing, from each of these pillars to maintain a healthy gut and to start to move our gut into a place of resiliency. So the first pillar is going to be food. So there's 2 sort of main ways that you can kind of think about how to shift your food. Okay, keep it really, really simple. So first of all, we need adequate fiber intake. We want 50 grams a day. So that's what you're shooting for. Every 10 grams of fiber a day that you add reduces your mortality by 10%. So this is pretty phenomenal statistic. So what I would do is start by just counting the amount of fiber that you have per day. There are actually apps that you can get on your smartphone if you have a smartphone, that you can like sort of input. You can even like take pictures and stuff of what you're taking, what you're eating, that'll actually help you to understand how much fiber is in something. So this is how you can start to count your fiber. But basically we're looking at leafy vegetables, root vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, all of those kinds of things. So shoot for 50 grams a day. If you count up and you look and you say, oh, I'm getting about 15 grams a day, do not increase it to 50 grams the next day. You're going to have a lot of gas and bloating. And you'd be like, what the hell? This doesn't work. I'm not going to listen to anything Ellen says. Increase it very slowly. Okay. Increase by 5 grams a day or even less, especially if you already have some gas and bloating issues. If that's the case, then there's likely some deeper work that we need to do. So this particular recommendation may or may not work for some of you immediately, but still you want to be moving in that direction, even if you're just increasing by 1 gram a day, just starting to move the gut in that direction. The other very simple takeaway that we can think about is we want to think about diversity overall. So this is something I recommend oftentimes my private clients to do is just take a week and actually count up the number of different foods that you're eating each week. So you want to shoot for a minimum of 50 foods every week. So you just write down what you ate on Monday, and then on Tuesday, anything you ate that's additional to what you ate on Monday, on Wednesday, what did you eat that wasn't already covered by Monday and Tuesday? You go through your week and you count that up and see how many foods you're eating. And then if you can increase by 1 food a week, so this is a very, not a huge increase, but say you are doing 50 different foods every week, and then every week you add in 1 food and you keep that food in. If you do that for a year, then you're up to 100 different foods every week, which is wonderful, or 102. There's 52 weeks in a year. So that would be amazing. And again, these are 2 very key things. If we, in the food arena, if we just increase our fiber and we increase the diversity and just keep it really, really simple, that's going to do a huge amount. The other thing, now we can drop in a little bit deeper and say, which specific foods do we want to be increasing? Colorful fruits and veggies are super important. I already mentioned the dark red berries, black, purple, red berries. Cranberries are probably one of the key things to be getting in, especially for that GLP-1 production, because they feed one of the bacteria that's important for that. And one of the bacteria that's really important for supporting a healthy sort of gut lining, the integrity of the gut lining. So if you work with me privately, I'm sure I've told you already that you need to increase cranberry intake in your diet. So that's just a really, really, really simple thing to do. Prebiotic-rich foods that feed beneficial microbes and increase short-chain fatty acid production. So we want to focus on certain foods that are called functional fibers. So what they're doing is they're working to increase this short-chain fatty acid production. So they're feeding the microbes that produce for us things like butyrate and propionate and acetate and lactate. So these are categories of things like resistant starch, which is oats, cooked and cooled potatoes, plantains, green bananas, things like that. The list is a bit more extensive, but that's just a few things. Inulin is another functional fiber. It's in chicory root, garlic, onions, leeks. And then we have the oligosaccharides. We have FOS, GOS, and XOS. These are really, really important as well. And you can find there's a lot of different foods that contain these, but things like asparagus, artichokes, dandelion, kiwi fruit, and then a lot of different fruits and vegetables that contain these, but those are some of the more specific ones. We also want to minimize processed food in the gut because they actually feed harmful microbes in the gut and in the oral microbiome. And we want to make sure we don't have a very narrow diet. So perhaps you may need to be having a limited diet based on your symptoms because you're at the place where you're like, well, if I eat that, then I have this horrible reaction. I don't feel good. So that may be where you are right now, but we want to move from that narrow diet into a more, a more diverse diet. So meat, this is a really interesting category. Meat can be healthy for the microbiome, but usually in small amounts and unprocessed. So you can think of meat as something that you can have in smaller amounts, make sure it's, grass-fed, organic, not full of antibiotics, all that kind of stuff. Super, super important for meat. Meat does increase the levels of something called TMAO, which is associated with dysbiosis and cardiovascular risk. So some meat, but not a lot. Roots, tubers, nuts, seeds, etc., and then vegetarian sources of protein can be something that you want to be thinking about adding in. For oils, we want olive oil, flaxseed oil, and avocado oil as your sort of main oils that you're getting in. There's a couple of the keystone species, the most important species in the gut, that actually really love olive oil and avocado oil. So I started recommending, I used to recommend coconut oil a lot more. Coconut oil does have a lot of health benefits, but it also is a saturated fat, and too much saturated fat in the gut can be problematic. So avocado oil is a wonderful alternative to that. That is very, very good for the gut microbiome, and it's actually something that you can do even if you have histamine intolerance. You can't really eat avocados necessarily because that might impact your histamine issues, but avocado oil is actually fine. You also want to do a lot of wild-caught fatty fish, so especially salmon, mackerel, sardines, generally speaking, the smaller fish. Also flaxseed, chia seed, walnuts, pecans, all your nuts and seeds. We can have some of the seed oils. We just want to stay away from the GMO seed oils. So we want to stay away from, canola and soy and corn and cottonseed and all of those. But it's okay to have some sunflower oil now and then, or some of the other seed oils, especially like flaxseed and chia seed. Those would be great to be incorporating. You can, if you put things like flax and chia into your diet, you're getting not only the beneficial oils, but you're also getting a huge amount of fiber. So that's one of the great things to do that can really bump up your fiber. Artificial sweeteners can really disrupt the gut microbiome. So, check what you're putting in your mouth, especially with maybe gum, and instead get a nice gum that you can chew that is made with xylitol instead of an artificial sweetener. Or, I don't know if I have it right here. I think I used up my tube of it. So Microbiome Labs makes a wonderful product that I absolutely love, and I've really noticed the huge benefits for myself, which is enzymatic mouth cleansing lozenges. And these are lozenges that you can put in your mouth after each meal, and you just suck on them, and it has a little bit of the xylitol, which is beneficial for your teeth and gum health in general. But it also has a really specific positive impact on the buildup of plaque on the teeth and things like that. So basically, using these enzymatic mouth cleansing lozenges consistently over I think it was like 8 days or something like that, reduced your plaque by 60%. So it's really massive. I literally can feel my teeth feel different after using these consistently. I sort of used them sporadically for a while, but more recently I decided I was going to actually just go for it and do it like 3 times a day. So those are wonderful, really, really amazing for the oral microbiome. Honey is a very healthy sweetener, and you may have to be a little careful if you have any glucose or issues or things like that. But if you want to try to add honey in, there's a ton of immunological benefits and a ton of benefits for the gut microbiome. My husband, I just realized he just delivered this. These are the enzymatic mouth cleansing lozenges. This is what it looks like. We've definitely fallen in love with it. Okay. the other important thing in the food category, just a couple more things to mention. Hydration, really, really important to keep drinking your water. We got to support those mucosal barriers in the intestines by staying hydrated. And we want to eat organic, and we want to basically just eat real food with a focus on, again, on diversity and fiber. And this is just one more statistic for you, but humans ate an average of 200 different types of foods in a year historically. The average American eats 10 to 15 different types of foods. So this is just another statistic to help us understand why our diversity has gone down so remarkably. So again, count what you're doing in a week. Are you at 50? If you are, awesome. That's great. If you're not, try to get up to 50. Once you're at 50, start adding in one new food a week, get up to 100 in a year. Keep doing that. In 2 more years' time, you're going to be back to 200 different types of foods that you're eating, and that's going to be amazing and to, have huge benefits. Okay, so that's the food category. Pillar number 2 is stress management. So this is something I'm just going to touch on this briefly because this deserves an entire call, and this is something I will be focusing again more on in future calls. But stress can play a major factor in your gut microbiome. And there's a lot of research into this. But meditation and breath work, I believe, I can't remember exactly, but I think just like a week of consistent meditation, even 15, I think something like 15 minutes a day of meditation, will significantly modulate your gut microbiome. So just 1 week of doing meditation for 15 minutes a day. So stress plays a major role in what happens with our gut microbiome, plays a major role in chronic conditions in general. So we want to try to figure out what can we do to regulate our nervous system to get ourselves out of that fight or flight, and to bring about some shifts. So just a couple ideas for you. Again, this deserves an entire call, but breathing and breath work can be helpful. Meditation and mindfulness, getting out into nature, doing specific nervous system regulation practices, certain movement practices like yoga, qigong, and tai chi. And then I think for a lot of people, some sort of safe trauma resolution is important. So if you've had trauma that's impacting you and keeping you in that hypervigilant sympathetic overdrive state, what can you do to resolve that trauma? I find for a lot of my clients, that's really important. And then one of the best things to do is just more joy. Just figure out ways to laugh every day. That's amazing. Incredibly quick way to shift your relationship with stress. Okay, so pillar number 3 is lifestyle. So again, just remembering as I talk through all these things, what is one or two things you can choose from each of these pillars. So a few of the lifestyle factors that are important for the gut microbiome, we have exercise. So resistance training, this is basically like making sure our muscles have have some sort of strength and contracting that they're doing. So that we're doing something where we're actually getting a little bit of that resistance. This can reduce inflammation throughout the body. And specifically, there's something that is produced by the muscles when we're doing strength training that actually helps to seal the lining of the gut. So there's a direct relationship between exercise and specifically strength training and actually helping to heal and seal the gut lining. It also can help to increase production of short-chain fatty acids, that butyrate that I mentioned. So whatever works for you, there's so many different ways to get resistance training in, but whatever works for you, making sure that you're doing some of that every day. Sleep and circadian rhythm. The main thing here is consistency. So the microbiome has its own circadian rhythm. There are certain parts of the gut microbiome that will only really kind of do their beneficial work that they do if we have sort of a regulated and balanced sleep pattern. So irregular sleep patterns contribute to dysbiosis, and chronic sleep deprivation can really reduce beneficial bacteria and actually lead to leaky gut. So that's one of the things that I think is really, really important to look at. In the lifestyle category, we also have community, connection, and socialization. So loneliness and social isolation increases stress and inflammation, and both of these negatively impact the microbiome. There's these areas of the world called the blue zones, where the communities around the world that live the longest, like basically I think there's 4 main areas. I don't remember what all of them are, but I think one is in Costa Rica, one is maybe Japan. But basically in these areas, people live the longest, so they live like 100+ years. And one of the key factors is community. So one of the key factors in these blue zone areas is community. Also, being in community means that we share microbes with others, and that really helps with resiliency and diversity. It also helps us to produce oxytocin, which reduces stress and then reduces dysbiosis or gut imbalances. And then we have intermittent fasting. This is a really interesting category. This may or may not be appropriate for you, so just check in with your own body. But time-restricted eating, so basically eating within a certain window of time, increases the diversity and abundance of certain beneficial microbes. So there are certain microbes that will only start to really activate once we've fasted for 12 hours. So that means you stop eating at, say, 7, and then the next morning you don't eat until 8. You've given that one particular beneficial microbe that window from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. where it can actually start to do all this good stuff. It's not going to do that until there's been no food coming through for 12 hours. So increasing that to even longer can be more beneficial. This may or may not be something that you can do, so don't worry about it if you're someone who this is not a beneficial recommendation for. But it is something that can be really helpful. And then I'm putting sort of in the lifestyle category just a little bit more about the oral microbiome. And I'm going to drop a couple links in here for you, which one of these is a toothpaste that was recommended specifically called FYGG. There's a link to that. That's really helpful for the oral microbiome. I'm also going to drop in a link to a registry of biological dentists. So again, one of the key things that I really see a lot of in my practice these days as I'm looking at folks' gut biome tests is that they are, there's a huge issues with the oral microbiome. So I'm oftentimes referring to a biological dentist to say, hey, you really need to have this looked at and get some more specific support there, because that's actually going to very significantly help what's going on in your gut. So regular brushing, using toothpaste like that one I just dropped in the chat, FYGG, flossing, tongue scraping, using these enzymatic mouth cleansing lozenges, nose breathing is a really interesting thing. Have people heard about the phenomenon of mouth taping? Yeah. So again, may or may not be something you feel safe to try. It's not appropriate for everybody, but nose breathing is incredibly helpful for the oral microbiome. One of the issues with the oral microbiome is that if you're mouth breathing all night long, it's causing a lot of issues. Then another thing that's really, really important, and I think this is a key thing I want to kind of just share with everybody, is you've got to ditch your alcohol-based mouthwash. You just got to chuck it in the trash. It's not good for you. Unfortunately, that alcohol-based mouthwashes are killing off the beneficial guys as well as the bad guys. And it's just like taking an antibiotic every day. And we just don't want to do that. It's only in very specific instances, maybe you have, periodontal disease or something like that, and maybe you're doing a certain treatment of an antibiotic for the oral microbiome or something, that might be appropriate. But if we're just taking that alcohol-based mouthwash every day, then we're really impacting our oral microbiome. So we want to be using these other strategies instead. There's also one other thing I will drop in here, which is there is an oral microbiome test. This is not something I have any familiarity with yet, but a really important resource. It's called the Bristol oral microbiome test. So if this is an area of concern for you, then you can try that. Okay, pillar number 4 is this overall category is called exposure. So this is a really fascinating one, and I really love just sharing about this because I think this is a really important and fun thing to introduce. So the first category of exposure is something you cannot probably influence at this point. Maybe if you have children or grandchildren, especially if there's children that are being born, then you can maybe have some influence if you have that capacity. But basically, the first category of exposure is early birth exposure. So this is skin-to-skin exposure, vaginal birth, breastfeeding. This is where our microbiome comes from. There's actually some inoculation in the womb. So the mom's immune cells will actually deposit bacteria in the growing fetus, depending on what's going on in the mom's, in their life at that particular time. So there is some inoculation in the womb, but the majority of the microbiome comes from passing through the birth canal when you're born to the vaginal bacteria and also the fecal bacteria, because there's going to be some, usually there's going to be a little bit of that happening at the time of birth as well. And fecal bacteria is high in the bifida species, which is really important for the baby. There's also a lot of bacteria on the mom's skin. So skin-to-skin contact and breast milk is really, really important. So this is really fascinating. There are actually 200 different species in human breast milk. And there are oligosaccharides, this is functional fibers, you could say, oligosaccharides in breast milk that are there just to feed bacteria. They don't feed the baby. They feed the bacteria in the microbiome, in the baby's, growing microbiome. So that's super fascinating. And the bacteria get into the breast tissue through the immune system and lymphatic system. So this is part of what's happening hormonally when a woman is pregnant, is that the immune system and lymphatic system is transporting these bacteria from the gut into the mammary glands so that can be available when that baby is born. So this is how important these things are. So if you have any capacity to support little babies when they're being born and having these kinds of connections, that would be amazing, because it will make a huge, huge difference for their health and their life, their entire life. So the other area that we can all do as adults is increase our exposure in different ways. So we can expose ourselves to pets, to dirt, and to nature. So direct interaction with the soil and with nature exposes us to a wide variety of environmental microbes that support diversity and resilience. One of my favorite recommendations in this category is to go for your walk, maybe take some weights with you, so you're getting your resistance training in while you're going for your walk. Maybe you can just be taking your sandwich and your bottle of water or whatever. Go out, so you're going for a walk, you're going outside, you find a place, you sit down, and you eat your meal outside. This is actually incredibly supportive for the microbiome. This is a wonderful way to increase diversity, is eating food outside. Also, you can get a dog and take your dog with you on your hike. There's actually research that shows there's a higher life expectancy and reduced stress and inflammation for people who have dogs specifically. And the other thing you can do for exposure is just touch your environment. So you're out for a hike, you're walking along, pick up a rock, pick up a stick, carry it with you. When you sit down and have your sandwich, don't sanitize your hands with antibacterial anything. Just put that stick down, pick up your sandwich and eat it. You're getting exposure to beneficial microbes. Obviously, you're not going to do this if you're in an area where there might be, fecal matter or other stuff like that would be problematic. But basically, if you're in just a healthy outdoor woodland ecosystem, then this is a very wonderful way to support diversity. So in this category, maybe you can't get pets, maybe that's not available to you. So, think about what you can do to increase your exposure in these other ways. And the other important piece of this is do not overuse antibiotics. So we really don't want to sterilize except where we absolutely need to. Frequent antibiotic use really disrupts the microbiome. Basically, when you have to take antibiotics, you have to take them, right? It's important if you're in a life-threatening situation. Obviously, we're going to make sure we do that. However, if we take those antibiotics and then we don't replace with beneficial bacteria, we kill off the bad ones, we also kill off a lot of the good ones, and then we actually create a space for the bad ones to start to regrow. There's actually more space for them to regrow after we take those antibiotics. So it's really, really, really important to minimize use of antibiotics. That includes natural antimicrobials. So sometimes I see people are taking on like long-term taking a natural antimicrobial like oregano oil or something, and that's not necessarily a good idea. It might be good for a limited period of time as part of a therapeutic protocol, but long-term, more than like say 4 to 6 weeks, is probably going to be overuse. We also want to, I mentioned already the alcohol-based antiseptic mouthwashes, but also think about, antimicrobial, antibacterial soaps and that kind of thing. So just make sure you're not overdoing that. Use essential oils or use other things that have that same benefit but are not, strong antibiotics. So that's the exposure category. So I hope there was something in that category that you kind of, said, hey, oh yeah, I can make that change. And then the last one, the last pillar, the last category is supplements. So I'm not going to talk too much about this. This is something I could spend a lot more time talking about. I talk a lot about this in my private work with my clients, but I have been recommending spore-based probiotics for a long time now. The first one that I found was the one that Purium makes called Biomedic, which is a single strain spore-based probiotic that I really like because it's mixed. They got some fulvic acid in there and humic acid, which is helpful for to support the gut lining and also for detoxification. But when I found the Megaspore product, which is this one here, Megaspore Biotic, this one has 5 different strains of spore-based probiotics in it. So what are spore-based probiotics and why is this a particular category that is important? Basically, the spores are what we're supposed to be exposed to in our natural environment. So everything I just told you about going outside and exposing yourself to these microbes, this is what we evolved over millennia. Our gut microbiome evolved to interact with spores that were coming from the environment, through exposure to soil, to drinking water out of streams, to climbing trees, to rolling around in the moss, all of that kind of stuff. Basically, being outside and breathing and touching things is what exposed us to spores. Because we have come inside, we started using a lot of antibiotics, we have really limited our exposure. We need these kind of probiotics oftentimes to help to shift that. So this is a foundational gut support supplement, this Megaspore Biotic from Microbiome Labs. It's got about 18 published clinical studies. It helps with increasing the short-chain fatty acid production, increasing microbial diversity and beneficial keystone strains. It helps to resolve leaky gut, enhances barrier function, super protective of the liver. This is a really important thing as well. And it reduces systemic inflammatory markers. It also produces antioxidants. It's really amazing. This is all clinically studied stuff. So this is a wonderful, there are many other spore-based probiotics in the market at this point as well, because this is an area that a lot of people are realizing this is a really specifically, beneficial type of probiotic to take. The other thing you can think about in the supplement pillar is a prebiotic. So I have this one here, the Mega Prebiotic from Microbiome Labs. Again, there's a lot of different ones in the market, but basically it's those categories that I mentioned before, the oligosaccharides, those sorts of functional fibers, but it's, kind of packaged in a pill. You can just take it every day and you can make sure that you get that in there. I think the studies that they did on the Megaspore said that they just taking Megaspore increased your diversity by about 40%. I don't remember what the time frame was, probably 90 days. But when you add in the Mega Prebiotic, it increased by 140%. So I actually had a couple of clients who, consistently took these probiotics and prebiotics for, I think, probably about 10 months. They did a longer protocol with some other stuff before that, but they both increased their diversity by about 100. I think one of them was like 120. So And I'll just show you quickly because it's kind of fun to look at this too, just to see what we're talking about. One second, pull this up here. So when we're looking at diversity in the gut microbiome, this is one client whose gut microbiome, the diversity was 124. So this is our sort of where we want to be, like ideally somewhere above 200. And this is their initial, their initial result before doing anything. I don't have a follow-up test for that particular client at this point, but I'll show you one of my other clients who massively increased their diversity. So we just can see what that looks like on the results here. So this client was, I can't remember exactly, but it was like around 100 and I think it was around 150 or 160. And after doing the protocols, again, like I mentioned, for, about 10 months or something, bumped up to 269. So this is what we want to see. We want to see this massive increase in diversity. And we know that that's conferring all of these health benefits that I mentioned. So this is just one of the things that we look at in the gut microbiome testing. So that's another important pillar. And again, I could talk, for an entire call just on supplements because there's so many different ones to mention. And I work with multiple different companies depending on the individual, but the Megaspore is really a foundational one that I work with. And then the other two that I like to recommend a lot are ZenBiome Cope and ZenBiome Sleep. And these are products that support mood regulation and irritable bowel syndrome and help with sleep and basically help to reduce anxiety. So depending on what's going on, the ZenBiome Cope is recommended if you have anxiety or mood issues, and if you feel like you're really impacted by stress, you can just take one a day. And I oftentimes have my clients say that they notice within a couple days they're noticing a shift. The ZenBiome Sleep, a lot of my clients, including myself, swear by the ZenBiome Sleep to get really good sleep. I used to struggle with sleep issues on and off for a long time for various reasons, and now pretty much 95 to 98% of the time I'm getting a really good night of sleep, and that's, one of those foundational pillars. So sometimes we want to think about adding these things in. And I think I'll just mention one last supplement. I don't think I grabbed it, but it's from Microbiome Labs called MegaGuard, and it's one of my favorite to support digestion. And it would be recommended for anybody who has gas and bloating, a slower transit time, the potential that they might have this SIBO or EMO, small intestinal bacteria growth, overgrowth, or intestinal methane overgrowth. But basically that sense of like food sitting heavily in the gut. So that, or something like hydrochloric acid or another digestive enzyme, can oftentimes be really helpful on the supplement side of things as a pillar of support, not necessarily to be taking long-term or forever. A lot of times the supplements, some of them we might be taking somewhat consistently, over long term, but usually we can do a shorter protocol of, more consistent higher dosing, and then bring that down once we do all the other stuff and get all those other keys and pillars in place. So I'm going to stop the recording now. I hope this was helpful, and I will open it up for Q&A.